Hello everyone! In today's lesson we are going to learn how to create these fun throwback bike clicker beads that I'm sure most all 90s kids will remember. We'll be simulating these with Cinema's dynamic connector object. It's a really fun tool that allows you to create easy simulations that mimic real-world objects. So let's jump in and see what it's all about. Okay, the connector object. So today we are talking about the connector object, and in particular the slider function. So recently I did some artwork here for Amsterdam Central Station, and it was a poster series, and they were posters in motion. There's really no restrictions other than it couldn't be political and, you know, no violence and stuff like that. So here in Amsterdam, they're all about their bikes. So I thought it would be fun to do a poster that was just a little reminder for everyone going to work to say, hey, you know, stay young, you know, try to keep it fresh and don't get too run down in your daily activities. So the idea was to take a bike wheel that was seemingly adult, you know, it's an adult wheel, it's a road bike, something a kid really wouldn't use, and to put something that has, you know, a nod to being young. So I'm sure a lot of you probably remember these bike clickers. They make noise when you ride them, and you know, you can give them different colors and everything, and they're fun. But most adults wouldn't do that. So that was the idea. Basically, take something that's adult and put something young on it. And also just trying to get people a laugh. So I knew I wanted to do this, but I didn't know necessarily how to do it. You know, I didn't want to animate it by hand because that would suck. And I also just knew that there was other ways. So I always knew about the connector object, and I'd played with it before, but I'd never actually used it in a real project. So I was always just goofing off and, you know, whatever. So I had to figure out how to do this. So I started doing some research about what would actually work for me. And what I came to a conclusion was for this in particular one, the slider function underneath the connector object is what I needed. So this first part, this is going to be a two-part section, this video. So the first part is going to be about the connector object. So if you already know the connector object and you don't want to sit through this, skip on. I'll try to put a link to the second part. First part's going to be about the connector object. Second part is going to be about like how to actually use it and make the wheel. Okay, so the connector object. So I'm not going to go crazy with it. I'm just going to go give you the brief overview. And I think the best way to do that is just to look at the help files. And it's not going to be too boring, I promise. I won't be in here long. But basically what it does, the connector restricts the movement and rotation of rigid and soft bodies. So if you've ever worked with dynamics, you know that they go nuts. They're hard to control and they suck. Well, they don't suck, but they're difficult to work with. So what this does is it restricts its movement. So it kind of mimics real world objects in the sense that you can attach it to like poles, and it'll, you know, for instance, you could do a hinge, and the hinge is, if you want to do like a clock moving or just a door swinging open, you know, it restricts that dynamic motion of, for instance, the door to the hinge. That way your door is not going freaking crazy like it normally would with dynamics. So it's just a way to control them in different real world scenarios. I consider these to be more real world. So there's a few different ones that we have here. Hinge, cardan, I guess. This looks like it just rotates in two different directions. Ball socket, I think we all know what that is. Rotates in, you know, three different directions. A ragdoll, this one, it's hard to explain, but basically it goes in every direction. It goes crazy pretty much. You can, it goes in a lot of different directions when you actually use this one. You have a slider object, which just goes from A to B, and it doesn't rotate. You see this just the back and forth motion. And then you have a twister slider, and the only difference with this is that it rotates from left to right. Whereas all these are just rotation. Yeah, I didn't mention that. These are just rotation, and then these actually move, the position. So we're going to just focus on the slider because what I need an object to move across the bar. So this is exactly what I need. So let's switch back to Cinema and let's see exactly what's happening here. So this is the final project, so don't get scared. This is the final project, and it's all it's done. But under the hood, what's actually happening is we have a bunch of connector objects that are connected to these spokes. So I'm just going to show you really quick, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of how to set it up. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to, where are my spokes? My spokes are underneath here. I'm just going to turn these spokes off so you can see. All right, so I turned the spokes off, and even with the spokes off, it's still going to work. And then what I want to do is I want to show our connector objects. So underneath our connector objects, I'm going to say always visible. And you can see these connector objects are hidden underneath here, and it's actually what the balls are traveling on. They're traveling on that connector object. I'm going to make the draw size a little bit smaller so you can see it easier. And what I did is I made these connector objects just line up perfect. Okay, so that's what's happening underneath the hood. So let's do a brief demonstration of how a connector object can actually work. All right, so I'm going to create a new scene and get rid of all my default stuff. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Simulate, Dynamics, Connector. Okay, Simulate, Dynamics, Connector. All right, what that's going to do is it's going to give us a connector. So if we go under Object, and you have all your different types that we just talked about. Looks like there's even more in here. And the one we want to focus on is Slider. So let's go ahead and switch it to Slider. Again, if you remember, Slider is just going to go from A to B. So let's go to Slider, and what it needs is it needs two object inputs, and they both have to be dynamic. If they're not both dynamic, it won't work. So let's take, I'm going to take a cube, the good old cube. I'm going to set to 50, 50, 50, and then I'm also going to take a sphere. I'm going to also set this to 50. And then if you notice our connector object disappeared, that's because it only is visible when you select it. I like to put on display over here and set always visible. All right, cool. So now what we need to do is one object essentially has to control it, and one object has to be the dynamic object. So I'm going to click on my connector, and let's say that object A is the controller object. So we're going to have the cube control it, and the sphere is the thing that we want to move back and forth. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and position this sphere. Actually, you know what? Let's start over. Let's go ahead and make these dynamic. So let's go to sphere, and let's go dynamic simulation tags, and let's say rigid body. Okay, and this is under the assumption you have a general understanding of what dynamics are. So let's go cube, and for the cube, we actually don't want this to be dynamic because it's just doing the rotation for it. This is where I think it's a little confusing, but from what I can tell, you have to have, you can't have a null control the connector object. It's just, it has to be an actual object that has a dynamic tag on it. If you don't, it won't work. So I always just put, for my controller, I always just put a collider body. That way it's not actually going to be dynamic. So if we hit play, it's probably going to, okay, it does nothing when we hit play, and that's because they're both on top of each other. Oh, no, it's not, actually. Yeah, it's because they're both on top of each other. So let's go to our sphere, and let's move this over here, and nothing happens again. And the reason why nothing happens is because nothing is happening. It's locked to this bar, and the bar isn't moving. So if in real life you have a bar with a sphere on it, or a circle, whatever it is, and it's perfectly still, that ball is not going to move either. So let's make it move. So let's go to cube, and let's go to coordinates. And what we want to do is let's just take this and let's rotate it. Looks like Y. So let's rotate it from 0 to 180 like that. And now let's go back and hit play. Actually, you know what? Let's do 90. Because you'll see that it's going to just fall off. Okay, so it just falls off and that bar tries to follow it. Now, why is it falling off? It's falling off because it doesn't run in anything. There's nothing, I mean, it's dynamic. You have to think of this as a dynamic. It's looking for something to hit and nothing's hitting it. It's hitting nothing. And it's not hitting the cube because you would imagine it would hit the cube, right? Because we said that it was a collider object. The reason why it's not hitting the cube is by default on the connector object, it defaults to ignore collisions. So let's take that off and let's see what happens. So we're going to go back. We're going to hit play. Okay, now that's working. And then you have your normal things. I can crank up the bounce and it's going to bounce more and all that. But that's fine. I mean, honestly, I don't want it to collide right now because I just want this cube as my spinner. That's all I want it for. I just want this to be able to control the rotation. So what I want to do is I want to turn back on ignore collisions, but I still want this object, this sphere, to stop at this side or this side. You know, if I just to demonstrate, if I come over here and I take this cube and I put it to -90 in rotation, you're going to see what happens. It's just going to go straight off, right? It's just going to go the other way. So it needs something to stop it. So what we could do is we could put like another dynamic cube or like a plane here or something to make it stop. And that would work, make it a collider body, no problem, that would work. But it can get more expensive, and also it's just honestly easier to do it this other way. So if I want this to stop on each end of our connector object, you have something over here. If you select the connector and then you go to object and you go to lower limit. So if we lower the limit here and here, you'll see what happens is it lowers it, and we now have a stopping point. So what we can do is we can tell it, okay, how far is that? So if I drag this one, it's going to go further out. If I drag that one, it's going to go further out. So this is just basically the two ends of it and how far you want it to go. Now, what's happening? Watch what's going to happen now. So it's trying to move back to the other side, but let's actually take this cube and let's go here, and let's put it back to 90. You're gonna see it should like pop into place. No, it didn't pop. There it goes. Okay, so it's going nuts because the bounce is so high. So let's just put the bounce down to 0 because I honestly don't want to deal with that. There it goes. So there's the pop. So it pops into place, and the reason why it's popping into place is because this sphere lives outside of this connector, right? It's not actually inside that connector, so it wants to be in those limitations because we've told it to be in those limitations. So if it's outside of those limitations, it's just going to snap to it. So let's tell it to be inside the limitations. So with dynamics, you always need to be at the first frame, then do your movement, and then you can hit play, and it should stop, right? So that's great. So now it's stopping where we want it to stop. You know, it's stopping in the center point of the sphere. So just another thing to note, that if you need an offset, you want to hit it on the outside, you just need to offset your anchor point. So that's that. And then this is kind of the setup that we need for our spoke. So if you can imagine that this is our toy, you know, our little bead clickers right here, this sphere, and then that this is our spoke, well, all of a sudden, you know, we've kind of got a system here that could possibly work. You know, and one other thing I wanted to touch on, if you're wondering again why it didn't hit this sphere in the this cube in the middle, again, is because we have ignore collisions off or on. So if we turn it off, you see it's going to hit it, right? And then, you know, let's do a little back and forth motion. So let's go connector, cube, coordinates. Let's do -90. It should go back really fast. So doop, and then doop. And then you could just do that all day if you wanted, whatever. I could just come over here and cycle this, and we've got an animation. So that is the basics of the slider object. There's really not much more to it. The big caveat with the slider is it can't rotate. It literally just goes in two different directions. That's it. It just slides across. Cool. So that is an overview of the slider, and that is honestly what we're going to need to set up our entire wheel spokes. So this concludes part 1, and in the next part, I'm going to show you how to actually set up the wheel and the spokes, and to insert it into the tire. So I will see you on the next one. Okay, welcome to part 2. So in part 2, we're going to take what we learned in part 1, which is setting up the slider object with our objects connected to it, and we're going to apply it to our wheel. So let's go ahead and jump in and do that. All right, so first of all, I need to give credit where credit's due. This wheel I did not model. I actually found it online from a free resource. And that resource is desireeffects.me. So if you're interested, you can always just come in here and type in road bike, and what you're going to find is there's a bunch of road bikes. So I chose one that had a pretty decent model. So what I did is I chose this one right here, and I just ripped it out. So I ripped out the wheel, and I got rid of everything else. So that's cool. So thank you to them, and they seem like a great resource. I'd never used it before, but I'm sure I'll be going back. Here's the wheel, and the wheel's great, but what wasn't great was the spokes. So the spokes were a little low res, and honestly, I kind of want control over the spokes because the spokes are the most important part for me. So the spokes need to match our slider object, or vice versa, the slider needs to match the spokes. So I want to have control over that. So I decided to rebuild it, and it's super simple. So all I did was I just took a couple cylinders and I mimicked what a spoke looked like. So in this project, you'll see we have our spokes, which are just, turn this off, it's just a spoke here. And then it's connected with a null, and then we have our tire model, which has the rubber and the wheel, and it also has the axle inside and like an air pump. So this is what those guys did over at that website, and then I just took it out and rebuilt the spokes. And then we also have the toy that we want to put on. So this toy is, I just call it toy because it's easier, but it's those beads I was talking about. So I just quickly modeled this, and it's just, you know, a low res version of those beads that we can use to slide along the spokes when we're done. All right, so for now we're going to hide that. And the first thing we want to do is we want to create the spokes. So let's do that. So we know we have one spoke, and I like it. It's cool. It's low enough res. It'll work well for me. So I have my spoke here, and I want to make a bunch of them. So let's get a cloner object, and let's clone it. And then let's go to object and radial, and then I already know I like 16 because I've done this before, so 16 is good. So now all of a sudden I have 16 spokes that are moving around, and they're working for me. So that's great. So I have my spokes, and the next thing I want to do is I want to run, I want our slider object to match those spokes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do what we did before. I'm going to come up to simulate, and I'm going to go dynamics, and I'm going to say connector. And I'm going to hide this stuff really quick so I can see it. So we have our connector object. Let's do what we did before. Let's set it to slider. Okay. And then let's go ahead and let's tell it what is what. So as before, we're going to create a cube. Let's just make it 50, 50, 50. And in this cube, we're going to set that to be object A. And then for now, I'm just going to use a sphere just because sometimes it could be quicker for like figuring out your simulation and stuff. So I'm going to use a sphere right now to represent our bead, but we can just switch it at the very end. So let's take a sphere. Let's 50. I don't know if that's going to be too big, but let's take that, set it to object B. And then for both of these, actually just for the sphere, I'm going to go simulation, rigid body. For the cube, simulation, collider body. All right, so that's cool. Again, we lost our connector, so let's go back and select it, and let's go to display, and we want that always to be visible. So now we've got what we had before. So we have the same setup, and I know that we're going to want to limit it. You know, I know that there's a start and end. So let's go ahead and go to connector again. Let's go to object and let's set those limits. So set it to minus 200 and 200. All right, just that's what it defaults to. All right, so right away I see that it is facing the wrong way. So what I'm going to do, because I want this to be exactly, like my. Let me just turn this off. I want this to match up exactly with my spoke here. So to do that, let's just go to my connector and let's go and set it to be 90. Yeah, 90. And then I also want to label this like temp toy, and then this is going to be rotator. All right. Great. And then like this. All right, so this is something to always be aware of. So, so what we want to do is we know that we like this cloner object for the spokes, right? That's cool. And in theory, if we have our slider object set up exactly the same, we can just copy this. We're going to say that this is the spokes, and then we're going to say that this is the slider. Okay, and then let's delete the spokes for the slider object, and let's put in our connector and see what happens. All right, so instantly we see that it's the wrong direction. Well, why is it the wrong direction? Well, let's look at what we have. It's pretty simple. The reason why is that the spokes, if you look, I always like to keep my access points the same as my world space as much as possible. So if you look at my world space down here, X is going this way. Here, we'll go flat here. So X is going this way, and Y is going this way, and Z is going back, as you can see down here. But if we look at our connector, it's flipped. So the easiest way to do that, because I find that connectors, they don't really, for whatever reason, they don't really respect when you move their anchor point and stuff. So I've found that if you put a null and then you just drop it underneath the null, then all of a sudden it sets it to the proper way. I don't know why it does that. It just doesn't like to move its access points. So now what we have is we have it facing the right direction as it should, and it doesn't look right still. And the reason why is because we need to set our upper and lower limits. So we basically need to tell it what length to be. So that looks good to go there, and then we'll go something like that maybe. Just kind of guessing here. Just trying to get it lined up. And then I'm also going to set this to like 15 maybe, something like that. And then, which I think this is weird too. Like when you do that, it resets your links, which to me is weird. I would just think it would reset your thickness, you know, but it doesn't for whatever reason. I also forgot to mention this in the first one. These blue boxes here, those represent the object that's moving across these bars. That's all that is. All right, so that looks cool. So let's go ahead and see if it matches our spokes. It doesn't. Why doesn't it match our spokes? Do I have it flipped? It appears to be flipped. Let's just go back and look at our, that's why, yeah, it's flipped. So I obviously went in the wrong direction. So let's do -90. Now it should work. Perfect. Okay. I was like, what the heck? All right, cool. So those match now, so we can easily tell if we turn them on and off that they match. So that's great. So the next thing I want to do is I want to connect our bead. So let's go and connect the bead. Again, we have our temp toy here, which we're going to use. Again, it has a dynamics tag on it, and then the rotator has a collider body tag. So let's go to connector. Let's go to object. Oh, we already set it. Great. All right, so let's see what happens when we hit play. It just goes like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off this so we can actually see it. So our temp toy is way too big. So let's bring this down to like 5 or something. Yeah, and the same thing is happening before. So the sphere, the temp toy, is running into the rotator. So let's go ahead and take the temp toy. And do you remember, let me just turn off the slider. If you remember in part 1, I'm going to hide the rotator too for now. If you remember in part 1, if it's outside of here, it's going to try to jump into it. So let's just put it inside. And you can also see that blue box is following it. So let's put it inside and let's hit play. Nothing happens. That's good. All right, so let's turn back on our slider. And then, so what's happening now is all these connectors, every single one of these connectors, so we just made 16 connectors, are all trying to connect to this one temp toy. So we don't want that. So how do we fix that? All you have to do is take your temp toy and put it in here. And then all of a sudden it makes a copy for each, just as we are for the connector. So now they're doing kind of what you want them to do. So they're falling, you know, the ones that are going down are going down. And then the ones that aren't. So if we go and we look at our temp toy, I might have made it a little too small. Let's try 10 maybe. Yeah, cool. So now you can really kind of see what's happening here. So there, I'll make this a little shorter too. So let's do like 75. So now they're all falling, and that's great. They're doing what we want them to do. So what we could do is we could go our connector. Oops, not ignore collisions. We could go display. We could turn that off, and we can turn our spokes on, and you can see now that they're traveling across them. You know, they're actually like going across them because we lined them up perfectly. So it's not really, it's cheating, you know, where they're not really on those spokes. We just cheated it, which a lot of times with simulations you have to do. That's not to say we couldn't do it with these spokes, but it's just better to do it the other way. It's just easier. So great. All right. So that works. So now let's rotate it. So let's go to our rotator. I'm going to turn this back on, and I'm just going to have it go coordinates. I always get these mixed up. Okay, so we want to rotate this way. So let's go this, and then we're going to go, let's say every 25 frames, we're going to go to 90, and then at 50, we're going to go to -90, and then at 75, we're going to go to 0 or something. All right. Okay, so the spokes aren't rotating because the spokes need to be underneath the rotator. So let's move, I move the spokes underneath the rotator. And now we have liftoff. So they're following it. And you know, again, the spokes are just underneath this rotator, so that's all that's happening there. So that's cool. So now we have complete control of these spokes. So now let's check our tire model. And you can see it still lines up because we lined it up to begin with. But the tire is not moving. So let's put the tire underneath. Where is my tire? Okay, let's also put the tire underneath the rotator. So now you'll see, like if you watch the air pump here, it's gonna rotate. So we got what we want. So that's the initial setup. So now I'm gonna quickly line this up because this stuff can get super boring, I know. So let's just line up the spokes really quick. I'd like to be, okay, so slider. So let's, again, when you have dynamics on, you always have to go back to the beginning if you're making adjustments. So I want the connector to be back on. Actually, you know what? Let's line up the spokes themselves. That way we can like see it. So I want these spokes to be like on the back part here, right? And then let's have, that's 55. And then let's have the slider. We know that's also going to be 55 because they should always match. And then this is kind of where the detail work comes in. I really don't want to like spend too much time on this because it gets so boring. I hate it when people do this in tutorials. But as you can see, like right now, it's not actually like inside of it, but like you could just move it inside and then like come down here and switch the radius also. And that way the balls are like exactly touching, you know? So like as it simulates, they're going to touch that. It's going to look like they're going to touch it at least. So that's kind of like the detail work. You could probably spend a little bit more time to make it perfect or whatever, but I just don't want to waste our time on that. All right, the only other thing I want to do is, because this is back, it needs to be rotated in. So let's go to our spokes. Let's go to transform, and I'll do a side view here. So I'm just going to like, you know, you can do this. I'm just going to like rotate them in until they kind of sit inside of the wheel because they're pushed back in space. So whoa, maybe 6. Let's try 8. All right, close enough. Again, I don't want to, you can futz with this all you want and like make it perfect, but for this purposes, it's good. So that's set at 8. So again, we always want to have our slider be the same. So let's go to the slider and let's say 8. If you really want to get nerdy, you could just set up expressions and they would follow each other, or espresso, I mean. But let's see, the only thing I want to see is I want to see if these things are, yeah, okay, so let's just go to the very end and let's see where the balls actually like land. So they're landing a little bit too far in. So the easy way to fix that is turn back on our visibility and then go to your, this is where the to and from come in handy. Oops, not that one. Okay, so just take this and like move it up a bit like that. And then let's see if they land better. Nope, they need to be further down. Yeah, there we go. That should work. Pretty damn close. All right, let's turn off visibility. Yeah, so now it looks like they're actually like landing on them. Maybe it could be a little bit further up, but it's pretty damn close. Okay, so we have the back, and now we just need to duplicate that for the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove the spokes back out of the rotator, just because sometimes it can get a little weird if it has a top level animation. So I'm going to take both of these, our spokes and our sliders for the back, and I'm going to duplicate them. I'm going to call this one front, and I'm going to call this one front. And then all we should do is just take these, move them up together. Let's line them up with this. And then I want to, just for the sake of speed, I'm going to highlight them both because in theory they should both be exactly the same. And I'm going to, I just need to reverse this to be the other way. So let's reverse this. I'm guessing it's -8, something like that. Yep, that looks pretty good. And then when you do that, or wait a minute, are they, oh, right, yeah, so sure, okay, so we need to take that and then let's move this up somewhere like there so it lines up, you know, as close as we can. And then the only other thing I want to do is I want to just kind of offset these. So I want to go, not that one. I want to go something like that maybe. Let's look at the front view. Because right now, like if you look at the front view, they're exactly on top of each other, but it's kind of cool if you, and it's just more like a bike if you do like that. So I just offset it by 12 just to kind of give more of that effect. So now we have them both on each side. And they're not going to rotate until we put them back. So let's take our spokes, because remember the spokes are not dynamic, so they need to be underneath the rotator. So let's take the spokes, let's put them back, and fingers crossed, let's see what happens. Looks good. I mean, it's rotating fast as hell now, but it works. So really quick, I'm going to have this not rotate so fast. Let's do like 200. That way you just can see it just a little better. And then I'm just going to stretch these out. I'm going to reset and I hit play. So now they're all working dynamically. And, you know, again, like some of these are clipping in here, but just move the in and out points. It fixes it. It's no big deal. So what if you want more of these? So it's now that we have it set up, it's like super easy. So if I come to my slider and I just duplicate them, watch what happens. Like this is pretty cool. I thought this was awesome. It's just like, it just knows to put them on top of each other. Like they're on top of each other, so they explode out. So you could just come in here and just keep duplicating them and have like a million of these things, which is pretty fun. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is, because we're almost done with this. So the other thing I wanted to mention is, you see how they are popping out at the beginning? You can fix that by just setting your initial state. So with dynamics, you might or might not know this, but I'm going to delete the ones we just made. But what you can do is, let's get rid of these. You can come here to your dynamics tag, and there's something under here called dynamics and then set initial state. And that's basically to avoid exactly what's happening. So let's hit the play button, and let's say that we want it to, actually, we would need to turn off our rotation then. Window, where's timeline? Okay, so let's just turn off our rotation. Let's simulate. Okay, and then we're gonna come here to our two tags, and then we're gonna say set initial state. And then we can turn back on our rotation. And now they're not popping out anymore. So that's how you fix that. Pretty simple. So that, I think, pretty much does it for this. So now if I want to come in and just add a ton of these things, kind of go nuts, there you go. And you would just have to set your initial state again with all of those, and they won't pop out. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for us for this lesson. If you guys are interested in learning about the lighting in this, let me know and I can show you how I did that. It's with Redshift. But you could just, you know, you could apply it to anything. I'll put the project files, a link to the project files in the comments, and then also I will also put the links to where I got the model and where you can see the final version on my site. I hope you enjoyed this and have a good week.